Outside of love and religion, it's the most beautiful word there is. Tariff! We're going to charge tariffs.
Change and more tariffs. That's Trump's declaration as he returns to the White House. But with any change of US policy, there's likely to be an impact on trading partners and consumers. In this episode of CNA Correspondent, we look at how the world is coping with his return to power.
Diferentes colores, pero todos son importados de México.
The future cost of trade with the United States is opaque. Wholesale business owner Mr. Flores imports tomatoes from Mexico. He fears any of the tariffs suggested by President Trump will end up hurting consumers.
Cualquier tarifa es un impuesto más que nos afecta a todos. Sí, entonces, incluyendo al que compra una libra, al que compra dos, o al que compra 1,000 o 10,000 libras, todo el tiempo le va a afectar porque lo que nos cobren a nosotros se lo vamos a cobrar al consumidor.
In the last few years, consumer spending has remained strong, despite the economic challenges of inflation and interest rates, leading to a high cost of living, a major factor in Mr. Trump's re-election.
Tariffs will make our country rich.
But won't they raise prices?
Properly used.
The president says tariffs will help, but it's unclear how. Organisations like the National Retail Federation have assessed the potential impact of tariffs. Vice President Jonathan Gold says tariffs can be used as a tool to address trade problems, but need to be strategic and focused.
We found that consumers would lose spending power of between $46 to $78 billion. And this is on products, everyday essentials like apparel, footwear, home appliances, toys, travel goods. So, I think, again, as we're looking at tariffs, we want to make sure they're used in a strategic manner.
When Trump was last in charge, the US introduced tariffs on $360 billion worth of goods from China. Beijing fought back with reciprocal tariffs on US goods, leading to a trade war, disrupting global supply chains and increasing the cost of business. Later, President Joe Biden further hiked tariffs on semiconductors and electric vehicles. Data estimates show that across the Trump and Biden administrations, these policies decrease US GDP by 0.2% and employment by 142,000 jobs. One stated aim of Trump's new tariff plan is to increase US manufacturing and reduce reliance on others like China. But it may also push US trade partners away.
For all of these countries, the relationship between the US and China is going to be an increasingly difficult one for them to balance. And Trump might make it easier for them to choose China, even while he's putting his finger on the scale to try and do exactly the opposite.
With Trump's return to the White House, it's unclear how many countries could be affected by new tariffs and whether they will introduce retaliatory measures. For President Donald Trump, there is one clear motivation for tariffs, and that is revenue. He has pledged to cut income tax, at the same time to tackle border security, to defend national security and reduce illegal immigration. But with so much uncertainty, it's unclear who will pay the highest price.
Donald Trump once labelled the United Nations an underperformer, and during his first term as president, told the rest of the world he expected more from the global body.
The American people hope that one day soon the United Nations can be a much more accountable and effective advocate for human dignity and freedom around the world.
7 years after this first address to the General Assembly, he returns to office into a world grappling with many crises across multiple continents. Donald Trump's biggest frustration with the UN has been the level of funding it receives from the United States. The last time the former president was in the White House, he cut back US involvement to a number of UN agencies. He also started the US withdrawal from the World Health Organization. Washington is the UN's largest contributor, providing 22% of the core budget and 27% of the peacekeeping budget.
This has been a concern for UN colleagues for at least a year, ever since it became clear that Trump was running for a second term in office. Colleagues in the UN and member states here have been preparing and thinking through contingencies about the funding issue in particular.
But there's a warning if the president steps back from the UN, others may step forward, namely China. Daniel Forty from the International Crisis Group believes the relationship between the US and China will be a defining issue for the UN over the next 4 years.
We've come to understand that the Trump team is going to view sort of asserting U.S. primacy vis-a-vis China as one of its sort of guiding ethoses at the UN over the next few years. Funding might be one domain where that takes place, but on a lot of other political and policy issues inside the Security Council, inside the General Assembly, we're likely to see the U.S. try and view the UN as a primary arena to manage its competition with China.
Forty believes the area of most difference between the incoming and outgoing administrations will be their approaches to the war in Ukraine. President Joe Biden has been a fierce advocate for Ukraine, while Mr. Trump has said he wants a deal to end the war as soon as possible. He's also appointed Congresswoman Elise Stefanik as his ambassador to the UN, which she has called a den of anti-Semitism. All concerning signs for the likes of Simon Adams, who leads the Center for Victims of Torture from New York.
We need the United States being in the room and being a player that's trying to work with others and trying to find global solutions. Instead, what we've got is Donald Trump, who's barely interested in the UN except as a public speaking platform, and a potential US ambassador to the UN who seems like she's partially committed to defunding it and undermining it.
Donald Trump's return to power is being met with caution here at the UN, where analysts are concerned he'll be more focused on cutting funding than addressing the world's conflicts, famines and diseases.
We're doing the tariffs, and we're going to, I charged China. China was charged by me hundreds of billions of dollars over the last few years that we were in the administration.
The US-China rivalry intensified when President Donald Trump first took office in 2017. Now that he's sitting in the White House for a second time, the world's second largest economy is bracing for impact. To find out more, I went to Zhengzhou, a major manufacturing hub in China that once bore the brunt of a trade war started by Mr. Trump. Zhengzhou City is the capital of Henan Province in central China. With a population of over 12 million, it's one of the fastest growing cities in China. Historically relying on agriculture, Zhengzhou, like the rest of the country, went big on manufacturing in the 1990s.
Zhengzhou used to offer a great deal of favor to, in terms of the land concessions, in terms of the hiring services, and also in the improvement of investment infrastructure over there.
Zhengzhou's biggest break came 14 years ago when Foxconn, the world's largest contract manufacturer of electronics, set up its factory here to produce iPhones. Today, the city is best known as the iPhone City. At its peak, the Foxconn factory here hired more than 300,000 workers, churning out nearly 100 million iPhones a year. But Zhengzhou's economy has been hit by a cold spell since 2018, when Donald Trump, during his first term, began slapping tariffs and other trade barriers on Chinese products. The 3-year COVID-19 pandemic and a subsequent housing crisis further exacerbated the economic cold wave. As the world braces for another 4 years of Trump, I'm here to see for myself changes that have taken place in Zhengzhou since the trade war. Images of these workers fleeing Foxconn factories flooded Chinese social media in 2022. They were trying to escape the spread of the coronavirus during lockdowns, temporarily halting production. In the aftermath of COVID, and as the trade war intensified, Foxconn moved parts of its operations to Vietnam and India. Since then, the workforce in Zhengzhou has reduced by up to 40% from its peak. Trump's tariffs not only pose a significant threat to the city's economy, but also to the livelihoods of countless workers who rely on these industries. The ripple effects extend to the communities that they live in, potentially disrupting local economies and social stability. These buildings used to house thousands of Foxconn employees, but now lay mostly vacant. Businesses within the compound are feeling the chills, with 2 shops closed in recent months. 27-year-old Ren Hui, who sells Henan-styled cuisines like this vegetable soup dish that were popular among workers, now earns 1,000 yuan daily, a third of what he used to.
在这做6年了，最近2年生意可不好做，现在这边人流量太少，份儿汤也不让出来，就靠这边路边过路的能卖点饭，勉强维持，现在就是不好做。
Mr. Ren says he's uncertain going into the new year and may move to another city if the ongoing slump continues.
Now, with unemployment becoming a crucial issue within China, particularly for a younger generation, they feel a lot more difficulties. And for them to transfer to another city or to transfer their operational skills to do other business, it's going to take quite a while.
This Foxconn recruitment center was quiet at the time we visited. Recently, there have been signs that the situation may be improving. While there had been talks that Foxconn could abandon Zhengzhou, it brought in some 50,000 workers in the latest hiring spree in August. It also promised to invest 1 billion yuan to build a new business headquarters in Zhengzhou. Foxconn did not respond to a CNA request for comment on its Zhengzhou strategy.
Redirecting investment to the Vietnam, to India, etc., is not as rosy as they have foreseen such a sort of picture, because the fundamental issue is that China has a very strong industrial cluster because for some of the small gadgets, small components, you still need to source within mainland China.
But the impact of Trump's trade policy on China will be felt beyond its tech sector. Camping tents, tops, and cookware. These are some outdoor adventure equipment popular with American clients of this Zhengzhou-based company, whose products are also listed on e-commerce platforms like Alibaba. Founder Zhang Gaofeng started selling to the US in 2018 with brisk business. Mr. Zhang says he's managed to buck the trend because he targets mainly the high-end market with quality products. Still, he's not putting all his eggs in one basket.
目前我们出口最多应该是欧美地区，应该是美国是我们可能目前重点的客户群体，然后占比能占到我们出口的40%左右。其实我们现在已经涉及了像中东的。 东南亚这边我们已经在做了，然后的目前中东的业务我们占比能达到20%左右的占比，可能后期随着这个美国政策的调整，我们也不断调整这个市场方向。其实对于后期的，我们现在也想去做一些俄罗斯市场，因为俄罗斯的这个本身和中国的关系是非常好的这个关系啊。
As US-China trade entered choppy waters, Zhengzhou has been leveraging its central position in China's Belt and Road Initiative. It has ramped up trade with Europe and other markets through its busy rail links, with over 13,000 China-Europe freight trains launched in Henan province. At the same time, it's pushing to develop domestic industries and reduce reliance on exports.
China needs to work with more of the foreign businesses that are still operating here to give the world a very strong message that China continues to open.
Chinese President Xi Jinping recently reaffirmed China's commitment to further opening up its economy and align itself with international trade rules, warning that trade wars produce no winners. Whether that's enough to convince Mr. Trump that China is in for fair trade remains to be seen.
We need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right
the European Union says it's looking forward to a positive engagement with the new US administration. But behind the scenes, the bloc's been preparing for months for the possibility of a more protectionist president. Meanwhile, India, one of the US's key allies in Asia, is also taking a cautious approach. That's despite India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Donald Trump reportedly being great friends.
Bracing for a potentially frosty relationship. Just days before taking office, Donald Trump issued a warning to Denmark. Either the EU member state gives up the mineral resource-rich autonomous territory of Greenland or faces tariffs. The president says it's a matter of national security, citing the influence of Russia and China in the region. The European Commission has poured cold water on Trump's threats, calling them hypothetical. Whether a direct threat or a shot across the bows, it's a sign the transatlantic relationship could be heading for stormy waters. One clear point of contention is defence.
It's, if I can say, pretty wild stuff to be talking about him in this way in the run-up to his taking office. I'm not sure what one makes of that exactly. I think it's slightly unfortunate in the context of what is a more legitimate request on the part of Washington to see Europe pay more and do more in defense.
Donald Trump wants NATO allies in Europe to pay 5% on defence, up from the current target of 2% of GDP. But many cash-strapped European governments are likely to struggle to get close to that target.
A huge question here in Brussels is what a change in administration in Washington will mean for Ukraine. Trump has called for a quick resolution to the war, and the EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas says that Europe is willing to take over leadership on the matter if the US is no longer willing to do so.
Long before November's US election, the EU had been prepping for the possibility of a Trump win. Caught off guard by tariffs on European steel and aluminium during his first term in office, the bloc is now steeling itself for a more protectionist US administration and the prospect of wide-reaching duties from its leading trade partner. The EU has already floated the idea of importing more liquefied natural gas from the US to appease Washington.
If the US is the EU's biggest trade counterparty, maybe they need to dilute that a bit, because if globalization is coming to a point where it's not quite what we've seen over the last couple of decades, people need to shift their focus and try and find new markets.
While Brussels seeks to show a united front, the 27-member bloc has grown increasingly divided, with right-wing populism on the rise. For some EU leaders, Trump's presidency is a chance to bolster influence, both domestically and on the European stage. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni visited the president-elect at his Florida home earlier this month.
My thinking is that Meloni might actually try to play up the US against Brussels in the near future, and the Trump camp might expect that in exchange for concessions towards Meloni.
EU leaders say they're committed to strengthening the transatlantic bond. They say Europe and the US are stronger together. Soon they'll know how that aligns with Donald Trump's philosophy of America First.
The US is a growing market for Cygnis. The Indian IT firm specializes in using AI and analytics to deliver mapping and engineering solutions. As part of its US expansion, it acquired a Michigan-based company in July. And with Donald Trump proposing to cut corporate taxes to 15% from 21%, Cygnis' management hopes this will help to boost its US business.
The budget which the companies would have will be definitely larger to expand on the things. So, of course, IT is going to be key for that. And the companies, the small companies like us, who has presence over there or who has established their shops over there, will benefit from them. The tax cut is really boon for the companies, the Indian companies in US.
70% of the company's business comes from India and 30% is from the US. But Mr. Kimotkar says Sciences wants its US earnings to make up the lion's share in 3 years' time. The US is critical to India's $245 billion IT sector as its largest foreign market, and other firms are also optimistic about Mr. Trump. Rishad Premji, the executive chairman of Wipro, one of India's biggest IT companies, has said that the incoming president will be pro-business and pro-growth to the benefit of India's tech services industry.
IT companies which focus on outsourcing from the US and therefore earn in dollars are also hoping to reap the rewards of a stronger US currency. Such a boost is much needed, as analysts say that recent quarters have seen American companies holding back on spending amid inflationary and economic concerns.
This comes as India's tech sector is expanding in areas including AI and semiconductors. And analysts say that the Trump presidency and his negative stance on China could help to divert funding to India and help startups to grow.
India has become and remains one of the most preferred destinations for global capital. That is in all likelihood likely to continue with the arrival of Trump. In fact, the direction of that flow is likely to get even more strongly routed towards India. But I'll also put a word of caution that Trump is a wild card.
Companies, including Sciences, which send workers to the US, are worried about Donald Trump's position on immigration. And IT firms already had to adapt during Trump's first term, when the H-1B visas widely used by the industry became tougher to secure. But the sector is still hopeful that Trump 2.0 might help to bring about an upgrade to business